Okay, so this is my proposal for Venezuelan immigrants in Montgomery County, Maryland. To start out, welcoming Venezuelan immigrants in Montgomery County, Maryland. So I just wanted to provide some context about the immigrants themselves, how they're ending up in Montgomery County, Maryland, and the U.S. itself. So according to the UN Refugee Agency, over 7.13 million Venezuelan refugees worldwide have migrated from their country to escape violence, insecurity, and threats, as well as lack of food, medicine, and essential services. This is a lot of because of a high inflation and because of a corrupt government. Um, and since 2010, Venezuelan migration to the U.S. has tripled, which is crazy to see. You can see in the graphic here. In 2021, it's much larger than it was back in 2010. These migrant groups are usually largely entering Florida and Texas. And this is something I covered in my previous project, but just to hit on it again. They're coming out of Union Station and kind of getting stranded in Montgomery County, and they have nowhere else to go. And just a little quote I put here from Conway about hospitality, which is the simple, gracious welcoming of the other, a stranger and foreigner into one's civil community. It's really important that we accept these groups and we take them in as our own, and that's where this proposal is going to lead to. Um, so here's another graph here. You can see U.S. asylum applications from Venezuelan immigrants. It is more than the total of other South American countries combined in terms of asylum applications recently. And this is from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. But you can just see that there's just a massive amount of people that are leaving Venezuela, and a lot of them are coming to the U.S. To seek a better life. So when we look at why these immigrants are coming, it's also important, especially for the context of our program, to consider who exactly is coming. So age distribution data from the Migration Policy Institute actually shows that a majority of these migrants are from their late 30s to early 40s. I believe the median age was 41 years old, which is compared to an average age of 47 for all other international immigrants and 37 for U.S. born immigrants. Venezuelan immigrants were more commonly of working age, as you can see in the data, for the ages 18 to 64 in comparison to other U.S. and international born populations. But what's really important to note is that these ages are the prime ages where you're starting up families, you're building wealth, you're taking your kids to school. Most late 30, early 40-year-olds, their kids are very young. They've recently had kids and they're going through grade school, or maybe, I mean, some families still might be in the process of having kids or have very young kids. So it's important to consider how can we support and unite these very young families in our community, because they're going through really important changes and developments in their lives, and they're going to need important emotional, social, economic infrastructure. And one of the main things that's going to hold them back from this is language. So only about 6% of Venezuelan immigrants spoke English at home, which in comparison to over 17% of all other immigrants. And that's from the Migration Policy Institute. Roughly 52% of Venezuelans ages 5 and over reported limited English proficiency in 2021, which is in comparison to about 46% of all other immigrants. Um, so they're going to have a really hard time with language, especially because these immigrants are so recently coming into the U.S. They're not going to be familiar with the English language a lot of time, and it's going to be something they're going to have to learn and something they're going to need help learning, which is a huge part of what our program is proposing. And as I said before, a large chunk of our migrant population will consist of young grand families that will be going through so many other changes in their lives. And it's important, especially because they're younger than most international families, it's important that we consider this and we try and facilitate them in their growth rather than hold them back. And in my opinion, the most important area of need is belonging. So I saw a lot of this actually reading Almost American Girl. Um, Robin was in a lot of classes. I think this quote here is from her comic book class. She was dying to meet the kids in her class, but she didn't know how to start a conversation with them. And that was something that you saw a lot early on in the book. Her language barrier was really holding her back. But as we got to the end of the book, she ended up in an ESL class, and that actually ended up being her favorite class, English class of all classes. And it was key in both her language and social growth. She said it was her first experience with different cultures from all around the world, and they were all the international students together. versus her being the only one in her school. They were all learning English and getting used to living in a strange land. Um, I pulled a quote from Nieto here, building bridges that connect two places that otherwise might not be able to meet. This is exactly what Robin experiences in that class, where she's meeting with other international students and they're all growing together and complementing off of each other's differences. And this is something that our program absolutely helps to achieve when we're putting migrants together, um, playing soccer and eating dinner together, which I'll get into the details of our program later. But um, it's really important to be able to build these bridges and connect these groups in a common community. Like, how can we provide not just social and emotional support by uniting with the community, but can we provide linguistic support? Can we provide like connections economically, like even like plumbers or household help? Like, how can we build bridges and help these groups complement off of each other, locals, international individuals, and especially the Venezuelan groups that are new to Montgomery County? How can we help them build off of each other? Um, so with that in mind, this section here will get into some research-based findings on areas of need for Venezuelan students and even adults as well, even their parents. The first article I pulled was cultural stress and substance use risk among Venezuelan migrant youth in the United States. And this article talked about survey data that was collected from around 402 recently arrived Venezuelan youth migrants. I think they're around ages 10 to 17. They concluded that we saw clear evidence that negative context of reception and discrimination are related to substance use risk, and that immigrants faced many stressors both prior to migration and in the process of resettling. Because especially migrating from Venezuela, they're leaving very hard lives, and when they are met with resistance after already coming from a hard life, things get miserable for them, and they end up resorting to substance abuse. That's a lot of what this article talks about. But it calls to action that it is critical for practitioners and policymakers to support this rapidly growing population. And that goes for us as well, making our program. It's important that we really support this group rather than just ignore it. And that's why our program is so important to get into motion. Um, at the heart of the Venezuelan uh, issue is children and adolescents. So, like we saw with the age distribution earlier, it's a lot of young families that are moving into the U.S. and especially in our schools, we're going to see that a lot of young children and teenagers are going to be struggling with these immigration problems and moving to a new life unexpectedly. It can be profoundly stressful for youth. Because of language limitations, friction between cultural worldviews, and exposure to stressors such as discrimination, like we mentioned earlier, and maybe negative reception. So once again, it's really important that we help these individuals feel included, and we help them develop a sense of belonging in their community, and that's what our program seeks to achieve. A theory that was presented in this article that I thought was interesting was called cultural stress theory. It talked about adverse migration-related experience um, in relation to family functioning, and again to alcohol and drug use, which is what a lot of what this article talks about. Um, but negative culturally related experience, such as discrimination and microaggressions, can compromise key aspects of family functioning. They found, like parent-child communication, and that was something that stuck out to me because it's something we actually also really saw in Almost American Girl, when Robin, with all her stressors around her as well as her and her mother start to really struggle to communicate, just because they're so frustrated and they're forced into a new life that they don't really, especially Robin doesn't really want to be in. And this is something you want to avoid in immigrant groups, and it's something we seek to facilitate when we have our soccer program for both adults and children. Um, a second article I read was called "The Migration Journey and Mental Health Evidence from Venezuelan Forced Migration." And it said that understanding the relationship between migration and mental health is critical for public health prevention efforts. And that's really the whole reason we want our program to get going. But right here, I have this bolded and underlined: cultural, community, familial, and individual factors may increase the likelihood of migration, contributing to mental health disorders or foster resilience in multiple domains. This right here is the bread and butter of our program. It's basically saying that the culture and the community around migrants really has an influence on their mental health, um, and their way of life. And it's really important that we provide them a solid community, a really welcoming and belonging community that can help them achieve their goals. Because if we don't, it's going to have opposite effects, and that's not going to be good for the community or the individual. Um, this is a graphic that was presented in the article. It was a contingency model that was adapted by the author of the article to fit their needs. So this little bit down here isn't really about the Venezuelan situation itself, but it's interesting to see different aspects of vulnerability and also resilience that are being contributed from their past lives and brought into pre-migration and migration itself, and how that influences their way of life in the U.S. or wherever they might be, for that matter, and how we can be considerate of that and how we can help them grow into a better life. So when we look at all these factors and the situations that Venezuelan immigrants in Montgomery County are going through, this is where my big proposal for a recreational soccer league in Montgomery County, Maryland comes in. Um, so our league will take place after school hours at Montgomery Blair High School, which is actually the largest high school in Montgomery County, Maryland. It'll recruit both locals, international residents of the community, especially those that are arriving from Union Station, like I talked about earlier, from Venezuela and from other countries for that matter. And it'll be divided into both youth groups for students to interact and get to know each other, get friends with each other, but also one for adults, because it's important for adults, I feel, to make connections with other adults, because that can help them a lot in the workplace. It can help them find job connections, home connections, all sorts of connections that they might need to adjust to a new life. And it just helps people build bridges, like Nieto said, that they might not have gotten before. That helps them assimilate to their community and find resources that they might need. So, piggybacking off of that, this is why we really need that program. As we saw through first person encounters like Almost American Girl, like in Robin's uh, ESL class, it's really important to be able to interact with both locals and international residents of the community, because they can really build off of each other's experiences um, and help make really useful connections that can help facilitate their lives. It can be instrumental in their linguistic development, just like Robin experienced, as well as emotional support. And developing a sense of community and belonging is the bread and butter of our program. That's what we're really going for here. Our key elements, I would say, are companionship and relatability. That's what we're really shooting for. So for the soccer league, we're obviously going to need referees. We're going to need personnel to help with dinners, because we want to provide dinners after our games, so that not only can people get to know each other on the field through a common language of a sport, especially in Venezuela. Soccer is actually, well, they call it football in Venezuela, I guess, but it's the most popular sport in the country, and so that can be a common language that a lot of people, a lot of immigrants can find with people in the U.S. That they can bond over and they can grow, and that can help them develop. But the basic plan of our program is it'll run for 6 weeks in the fall and the spring. It'll operate from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. right after school gets out and work gets out, so both students and their parents can participate. And it'll actually feature, like I said, a group dinner to facilitate bonding and connecting between all the participants. We'll need at least 4 hired referees per night, as well as personnel to operate the dinners. And we'll probably need around 30 to 40 jerseys, maybe more if a lot of people sign up, balls, and access to the high school soccer fields throughout the program's duration. We estimate that it'll be roughly around $5,500 per 6 week period, but I think that budget can be flexible. We're really just trying to help the community, and whatever we can be provided would be really helpful. Um, so expected outcomes, we seek to increase a sense of belonging in the community. That's really our main goal. And we want to help connect both youth, students, and adults with friendship for youth. Of course, I don't know how much financial advice they'd need depending on their age, but for adults, it would really help to have social, financial, economic connections who might need them. And for students, they can help make friends. It can help them grow linguistically a lot. I mean, as we saw in Almost American Girl, it actually, being with students your age or even not your age who have the same experiences with you, who can share their experiences, it'll really help you grow a lot. And so we hope it'll promote linguistic development, especially for international and Venezuelan participants specifically. But most importantly, we want our community to have fun and really get to know each other. Um, So with all that in mind, I would like to call for funding for this program because to be able to build an infrastructure in our community, we first need an infrastructure for our program. We're going to need to be able to afford the supplies we need, such as jerseys and balls, to provide dinners, so we can really help our community bond, and so we can really get our program on its feet, and help these. A lot of the connections that these people will make, um, will probably be on their own, but by us providing that infrastructure to get them together, it's really important, and it might not happen otherwise. We also will need to be able to salary workers such as referees, dinner helpers, um, to help our program run as smoothly as we can. But by growing the community closer together, we can see not just increased productivity in the individuals themselves, but this program could bring increased productivity, engagement, and attractiveness to the community as a whole, with everybody uniting together. So in reality, it could be more of a gain than a loss, helping fund this program, because the reality is it's really going to benefit the community, and that's something to consider in the long run. It might actually be worth more than we could ever hope for. So thank you for considering this project. Um, I really hope you take it seriously, and for the immigrants' sake, for the locals'